Good morning and welcome to the first meeting of 2025, Session 6 of the Equalities, Human Rights and Civil Justice Committee. We have no apologies this morning. Our first agenda item today is to agree to take item 3, which is consideration of today's evidence session in private. Are we all agreed? That's agreed. Our second agenda item today is our annual evidence session with the Scottish Human Rights Commission. I refer members to papers 1 and 2 and I welcome to the meeting Professor Angela O'Hagan, Chair, and Jan Savage, Executive Director. You're both very welcome this morning. Can I invite Angela, please, to make a short opening statement, and after that we will then move on to members' questions.
Thank you very much, Convener, and thank you very much, members. It is a huge pleasure to present the annual report of the Scottish Human Rights Commission to the committee for my first time as chair of the Commission. I took up the post at the end of August, and it has been a privilege to enter this organisation and to front the excellent work programme that I have inherited and the strategic plan as presented and reflected on in part in our most recent annual report. At the Scottish Human Rights Commission, we continue to focus on delivering our strategic plan as submitted to Parliament in 2024 and our work on the key priority areas of poverty, places of detention, access to justice and the rights of specially protected groups. We do this work guided by a core principle in our strategic plan of recognising the human standing beside you, as well as our core values of accessibility, independence, universality, where we look to everyone's rights being upheld, education and engagement, and being an authoritative, expert and trusted organisation through our strategic objectives of purpose, people and performance. We're a small and dedicated team of commissioners and staff, and it's our collective privilege to serve the people of Scotland in securing their rights and contributing to advancing a human rights culture in Scotland. Our annual report 2023-24 period transitions the hope and disappointment of the advancement of human rights incorporation and the decision of the Scottish Government not to bring forward an incorporation bill despite years of stated commitment and huge levels of engagement from civil society organisations and technical advice from the Commission. Following the decision on the bill and giving evidence to this committee, meeting with the First Minister and other Cabinet Secretaries, we copied our letter to the FM to yourself, Convener, to share with you the range of proposals for action beyond the singular focus on incorporation bill, as we believe the incorporation project to be wider. The annual report 2023-24 also covers a period of significant development and reset for the Commission itself, including settling in new commissioners who were acting as rotational chairs throughout last year, in addition to their own roles. And I want to record my personal appreciation of their work and achievements. The commitment of Commissioners, staff and the Scottish Parliament corporate body to the recommendations and onward change programme set out in the governance review, and the confidence of the SPCB in resourcing our next steps there. The formulation and approval of the Commissioner Code of Conduct and Code of Governance within the Commission, both of which are fundamental to the effective governance and operation of any organisation, but especially a national human rights organisation, acting in accordance with our domestic mandate and international principles. We've had positive engagement from our independent chair of the Audit and Risk Committee, a clean and commended audit, and very positive engagement with the Parliament's independent evaluator. Our annual report 23-24 gives a glimpse of the huge range of work conducted by the Commission across pre-legislative scrutiny, international and domestic treaty monitoring, growing our own evidence base of rights denials for rights holders and the persisting accountability gaps for duty bearers. It highlights the impact of our spotlight work initiated in 2024 and reporting through 24-25. Our work on economic, social and cultural rights in the Highlands and Islands has generated huge public and media interest, as well as political engagement, including indeed a members' debate this week. I still feel very new in post and my induction is ongoing, but I am clear that I have come into a vibrant and purposeful organisation committed to rights realisation for all and to building our reach and capacity for that purpose. We have many challenges ahead this year, but we are in a strong position to respond positively to them, as well as proactively advance our strategic objectives as agreed by Parliament. And we look forward to continuing that relationship with yourselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're now going to move on to questions, and I'd like to ask you first up, if that's okay. You touched upon a few priorities there, but can I ask, specifically what are the Commission's top priorities for 24-25, but also on what basis have these been set?
Sure, thank you. Our priorities are set out in our strategic plan, which we laid last year for the strategic plan 24 in the period 24 to 28. So, in terms of generating our evidence base that informs then our policy position, informs our legislative and pre-legislative analysis and scrutiny, we're continuing our focus on access to justice. We've produced our places of detention report, review, recommend, repeat in July last year, which highlighted that over a 10-year period, the international treaty monitoring and domestic monitoring bodies had come up with a set of 29 recommendations for action, and 24 of which still remained outstanding. So we're continuing to press for change and action on those recommendations around places of detention, flowing from our other research work and analysis and working with rights holders and their families. We're looking to explore further questions around the efficacy and justice delivered through the fatal accident inquiry system, and a considered look at orders of lifelong restriction. We're shortly to produce a set of prison rules for prisoners. So we're continuing our focus on access to justice across a range of both places of detention and settings around detention, as well as information and advice on access to justice. Our spotlight work is continuing, and our priority there is the rolling out of the Highlands and Islands economic, social and cultural rights work, with a planned visit back to communities across the Highlands and Islands, including chair and commissioners as well as staff, in the next couple of months. And on the basis of that framework which we've developed for that particular spotlight focus on economic, social and cultural rights, we'll be rolling that programme and that approach to research out through the south of Scotland. We're beginning our new, we're scoping out our next spotlight report, which will be on poverty, and scoping across how we encompass our other strategic objectives around addressing the conditions of particularly marginalised groups, including disabled people and Scottish Gypsy travellers. And we also have a separate piece of work looking at cultural identity of Scottish Gypsy travellers, and in particular the long tail and legacy, harmful legacy of the Tinker experiment, as it was called. So we're looking across, our priorities encompass a range of rights. But the way we are working through those priorities is to generate an evidence base for you as parliamentarians to use in upholding and interrogating and promoting human rights, but to build that evidence base as part of our domestic monitoring and informing our international monitoring. But it also, the spotlight approach is a dual track approach. We always, in each of these, whether we're looking at places of detention or our forthcoming report in a couple of weeks, we're launching a report around moving towards deinstitutionalisation with a focus on the experience of people in long-term care. All of those we take recognised international rights frameworks and put them into an assessment or diagnostic framework of the extent of practice currently, where there are gaps in duty bearers' practice, gaps for rights holders, and then what duty bearers can do to improve that. So we're constantly taking that dual approach, because that's our mandate, is to raise awareness, to promote human rights and to educate around human rights, to bring about that transformational change in rights realisation for all. So taking that dual approach. So these are the priorities that stem from our strategic plan. We have external priorities that require us to be agile and responsive to parliamentary business, including the committee inquiry, and we have the external cycle of our re-accreditation through the General Assembly of the National Human Rights Institutions. The priorities were set through a series of public engagement and public consultation events throughout 23-24, and our strategic priorities informed, therefore, by experiences of rights holders, the evidence base that we are generating, the evidence available to us of rights gaps in Scotland, and indeed in consultation with members of the Parliament and members across duty bearer organisations.
Okay, thank you very much. Jan, would you like to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Convener. I think Angela's really eloquently captured the human rights outputs of the Commission. At operational level, we continue to make sure that we strengthen the operations of the Commission as a well-functioning public body and an effective national human rights institution. The committee will be aware we commissioned and concluded an independent governance review in 2023, and the recommendations of that independent governance review are currently sitting at about 80% implemented. The development of the Code of Governance, which is now published on the website for full transparency, is one of the primary outcomes of that, as is the recruitment and induction of our new chair. A few elements are requiring to be prioritised, which are structural elements around leadership within the Commission and the completion of the Commission leadership team. And with the support of SPCB, we have been able to secure some additional contingency funding on an interim basis to take us forward into this year, to allow us now, for the first time probably in about 17 years of the Commission, to take a look at the structure and the operation and the skill set within the Commission to take us to this delivery of the new strategic plan. As Angela has said, the shift really in the strategic plan, as informed by that really in-depth and detailed engagement with rights holders, with people, with communities, with civil society, with Parliament, that shift from focus on raising awareness of human rights, which the Commission has done very successfully over since its inception, but that shift now into accountability and what is the accountability gap, and how can the powers and the function of the Commission be greater utilised to assist in that. That requires us to look again at the structure and how we operate. So that's the final part of the delivery of the governance review, which we're on schedule to conclude. And the final part of the strengthening of the operations is around participation and creating the conditions for people to engage and participate and inform the priorities of the Commission. So we'll be shortly publishing a new participation strategy that's been informed by people. We are piloting mechanisms to make good on meaningful participation opportunities in the Commission's work. We're piloting a payment for participation scheme, for example, for individuals with direct experience of the rights violations that we're exploring to work alongside us and inform our monitoring work and also our recommendations to duty bearers and what may be improved. So quite a lot of transformation in the Commission that's coming good, and we will continue to focus on those areas in the next 12 months.
That's great. Thank you very much. We'll now move on to questions from Tess White, please.
Thank you, Convener. In this section on top priorities, I've got 3 questions, 2 for Professor O'Hagan and 1 for Jan Savage. So my first question, and it was good to hear, Professor O'Hagan, that you said you are responsive to parliamentary business in relation to the work that you do. And I see this as a check-in point with this important committee. So my first question is, Professor O'Hagan, you've spoken in the past about the importance of having a safe home, decent food and good health and social care. And if you look at our parliamentary business, they are on some of the key themes, important themes that we've been working on as a parliament. But with the worst statistics on record for homelessness and poverty, with 40,000 homelessness applications in 2023 and 2024, more than 1 in 5 Scots currently living in poverty, and hundreds of thousands of people languishing on NHS waiting lists. Is Scotland moving backwards in terms of human rights, in your view?
Thank you. When we have across our spotlight on Highlands and Islands, economic, social and cultural rights, highlighted the extreme conditions that individuals across our remote and rural parts of our country experience, the huge distances, the interrelationship between housing employment opportunities, available healthcare, etc., and the impact that has on building family life, as well as economic security, both for communities and for individuals. In our submission earlier last year to the Council of Europe on cost of living crisis, we highlighted again a range of ways in which individual incomes are not keeping pace with rising costs, and particularly the impacts, as has been also extremely well documented by disabled people's organisations, on the cost of living crisis and the challenges faced by people, and that we have expressed, including in this chamber, in this room, around the challenges for people to make decisions between eating and heating. So is Scotland getting worse? Partly the answer to that is emerging in terms of our evidence base, taking a human rights-based approach to that, which I think has been possible for a long time, but neither the Parliament nor indeed the Commission has approached it in the way that we're approaching it just now, which is to say these are the requirements of the International Convention on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights as supported by other conventions, and these are the ways in which those rights are not being met. So we're looking at the adequacy, availability, affordability and quality of housing, of access to food, of access to clothing, etc. And we find those elements of individual rights to be lacking in a number of areas, and that's what the Highlands and Islands report has spotlighted very effectively, and which we hope members will be engaging in, both highlighting and addressing and coming forward with proposals as to how to engage in reversing some of these issues in the debate in the Chamber on Thursday. We are, as I said in my opening statement, we will be scoping our next Spotlight project on poverty. And we're working through at the moment how we're going to approach that work, whether it's on a thematic basis, whether it's on a geographic basis, or whether it's in relation to particular groups or particularly marginalised individuals. It may well be a combination of those things. But what we will be doing there is to think, well, what are our strategic aims and purposes there? Where can we add value, both by bringing forward evidence that maybe hasn't been framed the way it might be from the Commission, and what legislative or other policy opportunities are there in the remainder of this parliamentary session. But if our poverty spotlight won't be published until the end of the year or into next year, so we'd be looking to the next parliamentary session. In the remaining period, there is a lot that this Parliament could continue to do in terms of looking at legal aid and looking across the budget and where resources are being allocated in a way that respects, protects and fulfils individual rights and addresses the gaps in those rights which our Spotlight and other evidence continue to address.
So they're still in your top priorities, the safe home,
absolutely,
decent food and
yes,
the health and social care.
Yes.
Great, thank you. And that leads on nicely to my second question, because of this study that you did, that you mentioned, Professor O'Hagan. And as a North East MSP, and it is something that we've discussed at length in this committee, we are especially interested in rural proofing, which was raised by Dr. Alison Hosey when she represented the SHRC during one of our October meetings last year. And she spoke very, very powerfully about this. And your work in the Highlands has identified significant gaps in the realisation of economic, social and cultural rights. And there are big issues that she highlighted around access to healthcare, for example. And it's clear that a lack of rural proofing by decision makers in Edinburgh is having a hugely detrimental impact on rural communities. So my question is, could you explain a bit more about the SHRC's work in this area, as well as the engagement you've had with the Scottish Government on the importance of rural proofing? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the Highlands and Islands Spotlight on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights takes the requirements of the International Treaty on Economic, Cultural and Social Rights and sets out the framework of what is required in those rights. And that's applicable not just in rural areas but elsewhere. But as you well know, in rural areas there are those additional dimensions. And I think what we're finding in discussion with duty bearers, including the Scottish Government, is that very often a response that says, well, there are additional complexities and additional challenges in a rural area. But if you take a human rights-based approach from the outset and say, this is the absolute minimum that people need to have, then that has to be your starting point. Not, this is the one-size-fits-all, and then we'll retrofit some access to rights, or we'll kind of wring our hands and say, well, I'm sorry, we can't do any better with the resources that we have. If you take a human rights-based approach to policy making and resource allocation, then you set out to respect, protect and fulfil the rights of everyone. And that means a significant change in how our public authorities, who are duty bearers, how they think about service design, service delivery, how they engage with people. And it means that meeting rights and realising rights for everyone across our remote and rural communities will require differences of approach. And if that is, and the response we're hearing from other members of rural, representing rural and remote constituencies, is that they have been making these representations to Parliament and to the Scottish Government for some time. And so there is a disconnect, I think, between different levels of government, but there's also a clear absence through levels of government, what we would call a sort of golden thread between awareness raising on rights, accountability, and what we're doing with our evidence is providing, I think, greater accountability and pointing to where this Parliament and this committee can make other duty bearers more accountable for how they think, how and where the absences are in their thinking that fail to address and put front and centre the realisation of people's rights. And that's the kind of approach that we're advocating.
Thank you. And before I go on to my third question, if I can just come back quickly on that. So take primary health care, the 2018 GP contract. Rural areas are massively negatively affected, and primary health care is. So the reason I raise it is because the number of huge number of practices that are closing, threatening to close, or handing their contracts back, and primary health care is really at the front end of our healthcare and social care system. So I just wondered, before I go on to my third question, is any comment on that?
Again, the report from Highlands and Islands highlighted the effects of closing practices when GPs retire or when health boards are unable to recruit GPs. That has an effect on people moving into or being able to stay in the areas. And so when the Scottish Government, and we happened just by coincidence, we launched our Highlands and Islands report on the same day that the Scottish Government was talking about sustainable communities. And so it's the need to see those communities in the round, that healthcare, access to economic opportunities, access to educational opportunities, appropriate, adequate and accessible housing are all part of the package. And that means duty bearers having to think about things in a different way. And I think what we've seen, and I've said this to this committee prior to taking up the role at the Commission, is over the piece of devolution and the existence of a range of public sector equality duties, and indeed the existence of the conventions to which the Parliament and which have existed even without the incorporation bill, there hasn't been that practice of human rights assessment. So that's why we see things like the closure of maternity services in the far north, which have huge effects on women's health and health care. And so if practice were improved in terms of how duty bearers, the approach they take to policy making, where human rights impact assessments and human rights analysis and the looking at the obligations as enablers, as framing how policies and services can be designed in the first instance, then I think we would see a very different approach to policy making, to resource allocation and resourcing requests.
Thank you. My final question is to Jan Savage. So the SHRC's annual report highlights evidence that after experiencing violence, women's experience of accessing support are falling short of the national strategy and undermine Scotland's compliance with international human rights obligations. And that's a direct quote. Jan, could you expand on this observation? And the question is, how will the SHRC work to ensure that survivors of violence aren't being failed by the Scottish Government and the system that's supposed to support them at their time of need? Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. The evidence base for that statement has arisen from our monitoring of the Convention on the Elimination of Violence Against Women, so as part of our international treaty monitoring approach. And this past year, referencing the new participatory approach within the Commission, our staff team worked alongside individuals, so female survivors, services who provide support, and really got a deeper dive into what lived experience really is like and what those experiences are. And on that basis, against the international obligations, made the assessment that informed that statement. So our role is to highlight that, so to, as we have done through an increase in accountability structure, and we continue through our monitoring role to raise that with government, with committees of Parliament, and we continue to monitor that. So we as a Commission don't have the bandwidth to make the change, but we do have the role and the remit to continually assess against those international human rights standards and those obligations. And the way that we will do that increasingly is through direct conversation with individuals, women and communities who are affected by it. So, and if we don't see sufficient progress, then that will therefore inform future priorities, and that would then be a matter for the Commission to consider.
But that sounds like it's a huge crisis now. Women are feeling like they're being let down. So monitoring is very important. You can't manage what you don't measure. So you're measuring it. But how are you making sure it goes front and centre of one of the top priorities of the Scottish Government?
On an ongoing basis, we do want to engage further with Scottish Government around implementation of recommendations. So there are two routes for us to do that currently. One is through the concluding observations through the International Human Rights Monitoring System, and there are recommendations there that are more general for state parties, which is UK Government and therefore in Scotland discharged by the Scottish Government. So we monitor that. We have regular conversations at official level and at Commission level with Cabinet Secretaries and team officials on progress. Increasingly, we would like to take the human rights monitoring frameworks that you see through our monitoring and work directly with committees of Parliament to ensure that there is robust and transparent accountability around what progress is being made. And if sufficient progress is not being made, then our strategic priorities have created flexibility for the Commission to decide where rights may be most at risk, and therefore to progress in that spotlight model that we've now developed to do a further detail. So that's not to say that that is currently what the Spotlight programme will focus on, but there is latitude now and space for the Commission to consider that on an ongoing basis.
Thank you. And I know Professor O'Hagan has indicated to the convener that she'd like to come in. And this committee, you know, one of the issues that has been raised with the committee is legal aid, and we are reviewing the legal services reform bill. So, and we know that that is front and centre there as well. So, Professor O'Hagan, and convener.
Professor Hagan.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Just to make a very small point about the recommendations of the strategic review of services and financing for services for violence against women and girls, which I was a member of in 2023, and made a series of recommendations about funding the shape of services, the process by which services are provided for a range of victims of sexual violence. And that strategic review took a human rights-based approach, saying, you know, this is a matter of the realisation of rights from a universal non-discrimination and non-regression perspective. Those recommendations were made to the Scottish Government in 2023, and although we don't exist anymore as a strategic advisory body, we nonetheless individually have kept up an interest in the extent to which Scottish Government have engaged and progressed with the recommendations from that report. And I think it's fair to say, and the Commission also has a kind of watching brief on this, and progress has been slow and limited at best. So there's significant, you know, again, here's another roadmap for improvement in service delivery that has been provided, that has engaged the goodwill and experience of a number of individuals and rights holders where we're seeing progress stalling.
Thank you. We'll now move on to questions from Evelyn Tweed, please.
Convener, and Good morning, panel, and thanks for all your answers so far. Been very helpful. I just want to build on some of the points that Tess has asked you, because obviously Tess's questions were quite broad-ranging. But how does the Commission currently measure success across its outcomes? And I know that you're looking at the theory of change tool. So when that comes in, how's that going to be different?
Thank you very much for your question. I'm going to turn to my notes so as I don't get it wrong. But there's lots of ways in which we measure our success and measure our impact. You've mentioned the theory of change, and I'll come on to that. But we also have a range of, as you would expect, management tools and matrices. We have a whole set of key performance indicators. We have the oversight of the Commission itself and our regular meetings where there is, as you would expect, a range of standing reports across our performance against strategy and our performance against our objectives. And we do a quarterly review of that. We also have an audit and risk committee that maintains the oversight of our risk register, but also, again, looks to audit our performance in relation to our resources as well as against strategy. And in relation to the theory of change, and I'll let Jan come in to talk about some of the next steps on the theory of change, but I think it's a really, really innovative approach for an organisation like ourselves to take, where we've taken our vision, which is for a fairer Scotland where human rights are respected, protected and fulfilled, and our rationale for taking a theory of change approach is our commitment to measure how our contribution to human rights in a very complex institutional environment, as well as where the duties land and lie. And so we worked with an external consultancy on coming up with our own theory of change, but the idea behind it is how we connect our actions to our outcomes. So is what we are doing making a difference? What difference are we making in realising human rights in Scotland? And it provides a framework to monitor our progress. So there's a whole range of ways, and again, Jan will talk about the kind of operation of that, in which we record our engagement, our conversations, what changes we're seeing or not against particular asks, policy asks or legislative changes, etc. Are we seeing a difference in how people are talking about human rights, how they're engaging, who's engaging with us, who are we engaging with, and how we're recording that? Are we seeing a change in the numbers of our inquiries to us, or indeed our media and other outlet coverage? So I'll let Jan talk more about the operation of that, if that's okay.
Absolutely, thank you. So absolutely, we have a number of metrics, as Angela has said, on an ongoing basis to monitor how we're progressing, not just to deliver our planned outputs, but actually what happens as a result. Aligned to the vision of the new strategic plan, over the last year we've been focusing not just on, as I say, what's been delivered, but how it's been developed. So have people and their experiences been informing our work? Do those people feel better informed and empowered about their own rights, so that there is greater agency amongst communities and people to act as human rights defenders in their own right? What level of engagement has there been with the duty bearers, particularly, who are required to make the change happen? What's happened in Parliament as a result of our evidence? Those sorts of things, we manage that. We monitor how often Parliament references our evidence and our work, and we're pleased to see an increase in that in the last 12 to 18 months, particularly as we've been producing more domestic human rights monitoring work, so assessment of what's happening on the ground to then inform parliamentary debate. So that's all on an annual sort of business as usual basis. As a public body that has a long time frame, we have this year invested in the development of this theory of change, and that's to take a much longer term look at culture change, at how human rights in Scotland are being respected, protected, fulfilled at all levels, and that we will make a commitment to this theory of change, having made this investment now over a number of years. So the process that sits underneath it is quite exciting if you're into tech and that sort of stuff, which not everyone is. But we do have a stronger system now for the team to be recording impact constantly, that just becomes part of the conversation in the Commission. That we're encouraging feedback from all of our stakeholders about how they're receiving our work. Is it more accessible? Is it useful? Has not only our evidence given some data around accountability, but how useful are these frameworks proving to be, because they're new for the Commission, to take what international standards say and apply them into a framework that can be utilised. So firstly, is that making sense, and then is it being used, and will we see a difference along the way? The theory of change will be a public document, and it will be published around the end of this financial year, possibly at the very start of the next one, and we will produce an annual, we do produce an annual report, but increasingly the annual report will draw data from that evidence base of the theory of change. So it's a different approach. We're really interested in it, and we'll continue to provide evidence on that basis to the committee.
That's great. Thank you for that. What would you say your biggest successes have been in the past year?
Oh, how long have we got? I think there's been a lot of internal wins that are maybe not immediately visible, and again, Jan will come in behind this, but I think it's really important that our National Human Rights Institution is a robust and high-performing and vibrant organisation where people want to be and want to work. And I think we've seen a lot of change. I mean, Jan mentioned the governance review that was marked a moment in time, and we've changed significantly over the last year. And in my short few months, I think one of the things that's really changing, not just because I'm out and about as much as I am, it's been a very, very busy few months, but our work programme is really biting in terms of our external presence, our profile, our engagement with rights holders, our engagement and consultation with duty bearers, and their positive response to the work that we're pushing out. We've had very positive responses from across duty bearers in the Highlands and Islands, for example, saying we recognise the state of affairs that this report has highlighted, and we want to work with you on how we can improve, how we can get it right, and what we need to do. So that's going to be a big part of our focus when we revisit the area or across the area in February and March. So our big successes, I think, have been that our Spotlight reports, which colleagues presented to committee this time last year as the programme of future work, the big success is that they're being delivered, and that they're being delivered in a cross-team working, a way of working across our teams of legal policy and monitoring, research and comms, in a way that's encouraging new ways of working within the Commission, and that colleagues are seeing that impact as well of their work. When rights holders are communicating directly with us, saying that they feel listened to, heard, seen, and that we're amplifying their voices. And that, for me, is one of our biggest measurements of success. I said in my opening remarks about recognising the human standing beside you. That's absolutely excuse me, has to be the guidepost of the way that we work as the National Human Rights Institution, standing alongside, bearing witness and amplifying voices. And I think the spotlights show that. We've published places of detention, we've published Highlands and Islands economic, social, cultural rights, and in a couple of weeks' time we're publishing the towards deinstitutionalisation around coming home for people with long-term care needs who have been experiencing care in inappropriate settings for a very long time. And so, again, we're challenging the process around the funding of the Coming Home Fund and the efficacy and appropriateness and adequacy of care settings. And that way of working that has involved a group of human rights defenders in shaping that research project, in measuring the change, has been a fundamental shift in how the Commission is working. And so working with people experiencing care, their carers and family members, as well as service providers and other human rights analysts and activists, has been a really important shift in the way that we work. So I count all of that as amongst our big successes.
And I know that part of your work has been setting the agenda by communicating human rights issues in Scotland across TV, radio and online. How are you measuring the impact of this on public awareness and the understanding of rights? I know that's possibly not that easy.
Well, but we are engaged. I mean, we produced, and I'll let Jan talk to the data on that. But we have already our own benchmark baseline data on public awareness, and public awareness is not, I think, where we would all want to see it. I think we are absolutely engaged in and want that to be a collective endeavour with Parliament as the ultimate guarantor of human rights, for Parliament to be promoting awareness of human rights and being about the experience of the everyday. To explain some of this maybe with an anecdote, when we launched the Human Rights, the Highlands and Islands Spotlight, one of the first questions I was asked on national media was, human rights in the Highlands and Islands, we normally think about human rights as remote and far away and even a bit more exotic. This all seems a bit mundane. You're talking about food and clothing. And I think that realisation that we're talking about human rights as being about people's everyday lives and the conditions in which they live their everyday lives. And that if people can't access food, clothing, housing in 2025 in Scotland, we do have a serious issue around human rights. And that has to be amplified. We have the role as the NHRI to amplify the voices of the people experiencing those human rights denials. But Parliament has a role as well in setting that agenda, in being more challenging and demanding of what comes through Parliament in terms of our rights being respected, protected and fulfilled. And then, as you would expect, within our management matrices as well as our public research, which Jan can talk about in more detail, we have, we engage in a lot of media monitoring and so on. But I'll let Jan give the detail, if that's okay.
Just very briefly, yes, absolutely. So we monitor that, and we have been very pleased with the indicators that are coming through. So to use the Highlands and Islands example, the media coverage that report has generated has been beyond anything that we've experienced in the Commission before, and our metrics tell us that. So not just about the coverage of the report itself and its findings, but the discussion pieces and the editorials and the self-generated content that it has prompted across UK level, national media, actually Channel 4 News picking that up, The Spectator picked up a piece on it. Places that human rights in the Highlands and Islands of Scotland would never have been discussed or considered necessarily before. We see the impact that it has had, and this is an important indicator for the Commission, the impact that it's had in this building. So we have had the report raised by numerous MSPs cross-party at First Minister's Questions. We have a debate in the name of Rhoda Grant scheduled later on this week, and for us that's a really strong indicator of the Commission's first strategic priority around its purpose. So as a SPCB supported body, our role is to provide that evidence through a really strong and solid human rights framework for Parliament then to take that forward and ultimately work as the ultimate guarantor of human rights. So for us, it's still early days, and that's the exciting thing about this, the impact of this new strategic plan, but we monitor impact in those specific ways, and the early indicators are really, really positive this year.
And it's really positive to hear that, because of this work, people are thinking about human rights in a different way. It's not those faraway rights as you're talking about. It's really basic human rights, food, poverty, all these things. So that's great to hear. My final question, and you have touched on this already, is about, you're saying you're going through a period of transformation. You have a new chair in Angela who's just been in post since August, so obviously very new. But has that had any real impact on your future priorities, would you say? Or are you just working through all the various changes you've talked about?
So I think the Commission took the decision in 2023 to engage and develop and stick with the time frame for developing a new strategic plan, and to lay that before Parliament by the 31st of March 2024. The process the Commission went through was extensive and rigorous, and engaged a variety of different stakeholders, and has led us to the place that we are with the priorities that have been achieved. The policy environment has also been quite quite turbulent and febrile, so that's presented some challenges for us to navigate also. But within the Commission, the emerging vision, and I have to say it was an emerging vision since I joined the Commission, and with the current set of commissioners from as far back as 2022-23, and we've progressed on with that, exploring and examining that shift from awareness raising and education, which has been a critical function, and more into accountability has been a consistent theme. And so the work that's been ongoing to shape the Commission's limited resources towards that, the investment in the skills and the training and the resources is paying off. The engagement of the staff team in the Commission's vision, it's really been a whole Commission approach to deliver on that shift. And of course, at any time the Commission, led by Angela, can decide to have another look at the strategic priorities, and we do review we do review that on an annual basis. But thus far, and Angela can provide your own reflections on this, but thus far that vision has been consistent, and we are so reassured by the evidence that we are receiving from people, from Parliament, and as you've just expressed yourself, it's good, people are responding well to the type of work that the Commission is delivering, the way that we're delivering it, and the usefulness of our outputs. So long as that evidence continues to come through to the Commission, then that will continue to inform priorities.
Yeah, I mean, since I came in, it has been very busy. We've had to respond to the Human Rights Bill, no bill situation, and acknowledge the immense efforts of civil society organisations who were hugely involved in that process, and also seeing some of the impacts on civil society. But in terms of our own organisation, I think, of course, there is an extra stretch when the staff team are supporting a new chair through induction in the middle of a very busy delivery programme. But I think there's a sense of excitement and vibrancy within the Commission because of the nature of this work, and that the delivery principles of being ambitious, being curious, being accessible, still absolutely guide our work. But we're seeing the effect and the impact of that. Colleagues who were the lead researchers in the Highlands and Islands project, or on the Coming Home Towards Deinstitutionalisation project, really feeling that the work they're doing is making a difference. And so in terms of sticking with our strategic priorities, we do, as we've discussed already this morning, have these various mechanisms where we make sure that we are working to our resource and our resource base, which is limited. We are working within our limitations of our mandate in relation to individual advice. We can't provide individual advice. We don't offer legal advice. Our powers of inquiry and intervention are limited, and so our strategic priorities, as Jan has said, are about this awareness raising through to accountability. And one of the questions that always guides our work is the kind of so what question. Here's a series of recommendations. Here's the legal analysis. What difference is that going to make? What are the actions required of government or other duty bearers? And who needs to do what? And bringing that accountability back. And hopefully that's what yourselves are seeing as well in Parliament, is bringing back those questions of accountability. So we need to be agile and responsive to the external environment, but holding true to our own mandate and our own principles. We set our own agenda. Our agenda isn't set by government or indeed by Parliament, but we need to be responsive and agile to when those changes and opportunities arise.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's me, convener.
Okay, thank you. We now move on to questions from Maggie Chapman, please.
Thanks very much, Karen, and good morning, both Angela and Jan. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for your comments so far. And just for everybody's awareness, as a member of the corporate body, I'm familiar with some of the what you've already talked about, Jan. I want to follow on from Evelyn's questions around that shift that you talked about, that shift from awareness raising and education to accountability. And Angela, coming in a few months ago, obviously to a set but new strategic plan, were there things that you looked at, you think, oh, but we still need to do this, that maybe the Commission was doing previously or just hadn't done at all? How in the sort of ongoing review of priorities, how do you make sure that you are capturing the stuff that you would have put in the strategic plan had you been there at the time, had you been chair at the time that it was developed?
I'm smiling because I'm thinking of the looks on people's faces when I'm saying, what about this? What about this? And because, of course, you come in with that external, fresh eyes and enthusiasm and drive. But I came into a new strategic plan, which was covering so many bases. And I think the approach, the way of working in the strategic plan, it's so much more than the areas of our strategic priorities, which in and of themselves are robust and well informed and evidenced. And no, I probably wouldn't have changed them, because we need to take an intersectional analytical approach. We need to take an evidence-informed approach to all of those things. And so I think, in terms of poverty, we are exploring with and for the rights of disabled people, the rights of women, the rights of racially marginalised individuals. And we've done a lot of that through the international treaty monitoring work. And so, again, that's generating the evidence base. So what changes might I have made? In all honesty, I think there is so much to do in the strategic plan that was agreed. And at a time of organisational change, it's important not to bring even more disruption, in a sense, as the chair, and to bring some more stability to an organisation that is in change. And as I said, our delivery principles are about being ambitious, being curious, and ensuring accessibility, and that we are respectful of the institutions that we work with to change on behalf of rights holders. One area, though, where we do look for more change is around our mandate and powers, and the use of our existing powers. And so, as we're working through what we have as our established strategic priorities, we are, of course, as a commission, so myself and the other commissioners, with the support of the staff team, thinking about, well, how are we making best use of our existing and limited resources and limited powers. So just yesterday in commission, we had a lively and engaged discussion around our next steps, around thinking through our powers of intervention and what they might look like and what they might mean. But where we're certainly very limited in terms of powers of inquiry and investigation. So again, how best can we use our limited resources, a very small staff team, and in a way that is not overburdening a staff team when at the same time we're going through the changes. So there's a lot in the mix. And so coming in as chair, it was important to be steady as she goes, but that doesn't mean that we lack ambition and we lack vision and curiosity.
Thanks for that, Angela. And actually, you've moved on to, when you're talking about mandate, I think there's some questions in your existing mandate and the existing powers that you have. The Commission has previously said that there's very limited use of your powers around inquiry, both in terms of whether the Commission has used them or not, but also what you could do with what's there. And there's also... I don't think you've done very much litigation work in recent times. And I just wondered if you could give us a little bit of a sense of how the work that you have been able to do, particularly the Spotlight work, how that relates to and how that opens up the possibilities of all of us thinking more broadly about your mandate. Because obviously we wanted to have that discussion as part of the Human Rights Bill, but are there things that we could push to the boundaries, I suppose, of what's existing to make sure that either through litigation or through inquiry, the excellent work that you've done, such as in the Spotlight, such as in the work on prisoner rights, can actually follow through to something meaningful and with that strand of accountability running through it?
I mean, these are very live issues for us. The revision of our mandate to ensure that our powers are those required of and necessary for an effective and robust NHRI, as set out in the Paris Principles and as set out in the accreditation process, and the need to retain and maintain our A-list, A-category status as an NHRI are very front of mind as our accreditation cycle rolls round this year into next. And so in the past, there have been questions raised about the extent of the mandate as contained in the legislation and the extent to which that is effectively resourced. So we're working within that mandate and limitations in the powers of inquiry and investigation, and the resource limitations that mean that are at odds, the resourcing structure that's at odds with the very expansive nature of the powers of inquiry and investigation. They, in some ways, I suppose, could be explained as the requirements there somewhat dwarf what we're actually able to do with the staff team and resources that we have, because inquiry and investigation has a very particular meaning in the Act and would be a very expansive and inclusive approach. You use the phrase push to the boundaries. It's as though you've been part of our internal thinking, because that's absolutely where the spotlights take us. They take us right up to the edge of full-blown inquiry into individual organisations. So by taking that spotlight on the rights and how rights are being realised or not for particular communities, that takes us into territory, touching on the responsibilities and highlighting the responsibilities of duty bearers, but without investigating individual organisations. Our strategic litigation and powers of intervention, again, are quite limited. But that, again, is I can't comment on why the Commission didn't previously use, but certainly it's a very live issue for us just now as the new chair and with my fellow commissioners. And as I say, just yesterday we had that very lively discussion about what types of intervention, what's our strategic decision-making process around intervention. We also have limitations on where we can intervene. We have to ensure that there's no duplication. So if others are intervening in relation to human rights matters, or indeed if it's not a devolved matter. So there are certain limitations around that, so which we're well aware of, but which require that careful sort of navigation. But we're certainly in the process of working through what is our decision-making framework for ensuring that we can be agile and responsive, because much as we can horizon scan and see what's emerging from others, very often opportunities for intervention arise quite quickly, and so we are very, very engaged in how to ensure that we are agile and responsive to what opportunities do arise and what opportunities we can engage with.
I wanted to say anything about some of the historical sort of use of litigation and where you see it might be useful in the coming months or years.
Absolutely. So, as Angela said, and similarly, I've been with the Commission just 2 years now. So, and those powers of inquiry certainly have not been used in the Commission's history, and I think limited exploration of the potential of the strategic litigation opportunities that are there. However, as the Commission has now taken a strategic shift to be more focused on accountability, the evidence base that's coming through the Spotlight programmes in particular are creating opportunities now for those papers, as they did yesterday, to go to the Commission to say, well, what next? And yes, we can continue to monitor and we can establish what progress that the state is taking in response to our recommendations and our evidence. But ultimately, if sufficient progress is not made, or if our Spotlight programme is uncovering violations that we believe to be completely egregious, then it would be beneficial for the Commission to have a broader suite of powers to enable it to take action, for example, through own name litigation powers, where on behalf of an individual or an individual affected by an issue, the Commission could raise court action against Scottish Government or other duty bearers to test the law, and it wouldn't be something that would need to be done frequently. Sometimes it doesn't need to be done at all if everyone knows that that's a potential option, but it's not currently a potential option for the Commission, and as a result the legal system in Scotland and the Commission hasn't really tested the potential of that as fully as it possibly could, and point to the forthcoming report on deinstitutionalisation and the progress that Scotland has made or otherwise towards that. You may well find that there are individuals, there are individuals who have been in state detention for reasons of social care not being provided for decades in some cases. And if the Commission is concerned about that, there's actually very limited action that the Commission can then take forward through its current mandate beyond advising Parliament of that. Even our powers of inquiry are quite limited in that scope and not particularly usable. So in short, we continue to monitor, and we actively, the direction of the Commission is really to look at that and to consider how far the current mandate could be utilised to test these cases and these issues through the court system. But that we also continue to highlight where those gaps are in the mandate, and the opportunities for Parliament to consider that through the inquiry and potentially through a forthcoming Human Rights Bill in the next session of Parliament are live opportunities to consider that. It's one of the critical routes that Parliament could consider to improve human rights realisation in Scotland, undoubtedly. Mm-hmm.
That's helpful. And I suppose in some ways there is actually quite a big conversation around the litigation powers, particularly if the non-overlap remains, because there obviously there need to be mechanisms of communication, of information sharing with other, whether they are commissions, whether they are other organisations with responsibility to check or bear duties. So there's quite a complex system in that we maybe haven't really got to grips with yet. Okay, so that's an ongoing conversation. My next question is about SNAP 2. Now, I know the Scotland's National Action Plan for Human Rights is it runs to 2030, and the Scottish Government sort of own that. But I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about what role that plays, because you've spoken already this morning about ensuring that you are responsive, ensuring that you are scanning potential issues, and I'm wondering how your strategic priorities sort of, I suppose, dovetail with SNAP 2, and where are there points of friction, if there are points of friction? I don't know, Angela or Jan, whoever wants to take that first.
Well, I can start, and Jan will come in with the detail, I'm sure. I mean, obviously, members will be familiar with SNAP and the multiple recommendations there, which do dovetail effectively with our own strategic plan and strategic objectives. I have to say, I think the momentum of SNAP 2 has dissipated significantly, and it's only been in recent months that there's been sort of renewal of activity in and around SNAP 2. And SNAP is another area of where the Scottish Government have sought to both lead the agenda setting process, but that was done through a process of extended engagement with rights holders and duty bearers, but really informed and developed by civil society and people's everyday experiences, as well as with some support from the Commission insofar as the Commission previously hosted the Secretariat for the SNAP process, and Commission staff members were involved in various of the bits of the infrastructure of the SNAP process. We stepped back from being co-chair of the process a while ago, and that predates certainly myself and possibly Jan, or around about the time of other changes within the Commission. So I think it depends what you mean by friction. Friction can be confrontation, or it can be that positive engagement. And I think it's that positive engagement that we're looking for. So what in SNAP 2 dovetails and overlaps with our own strategic objectives, which of course then it's in those areas of accountability of duty bearers, the completion of actions pending. So back to accountability. When so many of the actions in SNAP 2 continue to apply across duty bearers, across the public sector, and in terms of how legislation and policy is produced, what participation is there, what engagement is there, what consultation. And so that the actions in SNAP 2 mirror our own ways of working and how we're shifting our ways of working as well, and how we're seeking to encourage the Scottish Government and others to ensure that there is a serious and continued engagement with civil society and rights holders in a way that isn't sort of extractive of people's experience, but is actually transformative in terms of how policy making is made. But in terms of the actual structures and our engagement and where the pinch points are, I think Jan's better placed on that.
Yep, absolutely. So the SNAP2 action plan obviously is independent of the Commission. It's owned by the SNAP2 leadership panel, and that's facilitated by government and others. But as part of the evidence base that we looked to in the development of the strategic plan for the Commission, we of course looked at the priorities that had been identified by the SNAP2 leadership panel, and that informed some of the emergence of strategic priority focus areas, amongst other evidence for the Commission. And as we have emerged, the focus on places of detention, ESC rights, deinstitutionalisation and the progress towards the ending of that practice, and for the cultural rights of the Gypsy Traveller community that's part of our ongoing Spotlight programme, are all actually priority areas that had been identified within the SNAP2 list of 50-odd actions and priorities that had been identified at that time. We have had engagement with the officials leading on SNAP2, as with the leadership panel, and our intention is that this year that the Commission can go in and present not only our findings in terms of a contemporary assessment of the status of rights in each of those 4 areas, because we have that evidence now, but that we can provide the monitoring tools, the frameworks that we've developed, which haven't been before developed in Scotland. What we want now is for Scottish Government and other duty bearers to take them forward and apply them. You quite often get the question, what does a human rights-based approach really look like? Well, actually, here's a framework that shows you. Here are the things that should be in place. Here are the questions you should be asking to demonstrate progress. And here's how you can monitor that on an ongoing basis. So our offer into that programme is that we now have provided specific frameworks aligned to each of those groups of rights and potential rights violations that should demonstrate a human rights-based approach across policy areas and across directorates within the civil service and across cabinet, that should promote action and provide us all with a shared baseline to monitor improvements in the future.
So there's actually quite an exciting opportunity there for reciprocity then, actually not overlapping, but really working, using each other to the benefit of citizens across Scotland, in those targeted groups. I'll leave it there, Karen. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, excuse me. We'll now move on to questions from Marie McNair, please.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, panel. You obviously be aware that Parliament recently agreed a moratorium on new commissions and obviously a root and branch review on existing commissions. What's your thoughts on that position? I'll go to Jan first. You're nodding your head, sir. Yep.
So as a Commission in 2023, in the annual report cycle that we're considering, the Commission had published a report, a Crossroads report, which really looked at the emerging trend around the progression for asks for new public bodies to uphold human rights of different groups of people through new commissions and commissioners. And one of the recommendations, so firstly we considered that from the perspective of rights holders, so actually what's going on, why are people feeling so frustrated around access to justice that they feel that that's the only route through this. And we encouraged Parliament to take a more strategic look at that emerging landscape. So we're really pleased with the committee inquiry and the subsequent strategic look at the landscape. A moratorium to enable a deeper look at what better use of the existing commissioner landscape can be made to us as a sensible moment in time. Does that remove the challenges experienced by individuals around access to justice, disabled people, women, older people, people experiencing food insecurity? No, it doesn't. And so what's important now is pace. And for us to, as part of this next phase of the inquiry, for the Commission to be open to those other conversations about how stronger partnership working across the existing office holder landscape can secure better outcomes ultimately for people. So we're mindful that a moratorium does delay development and access to justice for individuals, whether that's through new public bodies or an expansion of powers for organisations such as the Commission. But so long as the timeline progresses quickly and that Parliament's prepared to take action as a result of the forthcoming inquiry, then ultimately that should have the potential to deliver better outcomes for human rights in Scotland.
Thank you. That's really helpful to the committee. Professor O'Hagan, do you have anything further you want to add to that?
Yes, thank you. I mean, I think Jan's absolutely right in terms of the Commission's role to some degree in setting an agenda. I mean, we've discussed for a number of years, the Commission has discussed the questions that we're discussing today around powers and mandate, and that has both maybe contributed to and also aligned with some of Parliament's interest in this area. I think some of the language at times is unhelpful to talk about proliferation and root and branch. They suggest a kind of negative starting point, whereas we are absolutely open to opportunities for more effective shared services and more streamlined management functions in the requirements of reporting and audit, etc., as required by the Parliament and the Scottish Parliament corporate body. I think it's also, we should be mindful that these structures were created by Parliament in response to either different legislation or legislative and structural opportunities. And so there's been a variation of the structures, and we're not all the same. Scottish Commission on Human Rights is a commission with a chair and commissioners, which is a very different structure from the Children's Commissioner, which again is a different structure from the Biometrics Commissioner, and so on. So it's really important that in analysing the functions and efficacy and impact of these organisations, that we recognise that there is a significant difference in their structures, their mandates and the limitations of those mandates. And the final point I wanted to make is the language of the committee in setting up in its report that has now led to the inquiry committee. To talk about a root and branch review suggests again that it's coming from a place of concern about conduct. For us, root and branch means human rights. Human rights are rooted in the realities of people's lives, and the branches are in all aspects of our lives that we've touched on today in terms of violence, transport, healthcare, social care. These are all the branches of our lives. So for us, a root and branch review that it takes a human rights-based approach would be very welcome, and that the branches are the delivery through the duty bearers. And so with that lens, then it's about, well, how does emerging from this inquiry and conversation around root and branch, how does that help the Parliament think about itself as a guarantor of rights? How does it help duty bearers think about what they need to do? And how does it help the Parliament think about what is it that they need from independent institutions like a National Human Rights Institution in order to support the delivery of those rights and the security of those rights through Parliament?
Very helpful comments that the committee will take away. See, going back on to discussion there about powers, and obviously in your earlier responses to Maggie Chapman, obviously in terms of the Commission, through the discussion, it looks as if you're looking to seek further powers. Just to confirm, is that the case? And obviously, you spoke about limited resources as well. Do you feel that you are adequately resourced in terms of to fulfil your duties within it?
Well, I'll maybe start on powers and let Jan talk about resources. I mean, I think as we've articulated this morning, as we set out in the Crossroads report, as has been a kind of ongoing conversation in terms of the match between what is required of a National Human Rights Institution in relation to our mandate as compliant with the Paris Principles for National Human Rights Institutions, our accreditation as an A-list. So do we have the powers and are they usable? And the conversation that's been long running in relation to the Commission's powers is the effect to which they are usable in their current form, and the limitations in terms of securing rights realisation without the power to offer advice to individuals to take legal action in our own name. That restricts that conversion from a conversation about rights to rights realisation and impactful and lasting change. So and I think the Commission has very carefully navigated within the discussion, and we've been very respectful and are respectful and appreciative of those who are making and have made the calls for additional commissioners or commissioners. And our response has always been those calls are coming from a place of need, a place of evidence where rights are not being recognised. And we need to have a systemic response to those systemic violations of rights. And some of that can be addressed by having a National Human Rights Commission that has the capacity and potency to realise those rights in the way that the UN and other systems would expect. Our resources, I'll leave to Jan to talk about.
Thank you. So certainly, resource-wise, the Commission is a small public body, so our head count of people level is 15 people. We have had, until 23-24, had a relatively static budget from inception. Over the process of 23-24, we did see a slight increase in our non-salary overhead budget, and that was deliberately to enable us to deliver more of the work that we've discussed today. So that requires getting out of Edinburgh, going into communities, travelling, meeting with people, publishing our findings, considering accessible versions of that, easy read, BSL, all of that stuff. So it's cost a wee bit more to deliver that. So that has been there. And what we'll see this year is a further increase as a result of two adjustments. One being negotiated settlement with the Scottish Government around the new powers that we do have as a result of the UNCRC Act, which gives us increased powers of strategic litigation through intervention, and for the first time the potential for own name litigation powers related to UNCRC Act in particular. And so we've got a lot to work through there, and we've agreed, because this is new and it's untested, that we will recruit on a 2-year temporary basis to allow Parliament, the Commission and Government to assess what the impact of those powers have been, and we do need to work through how we deliver that and how we work in partnership with the Children's Commissioner on those areas. So there will be an increase there, and then the second increase will be on a temporary basis. Again, the investment that SPCB has agreed with us to enable us to have a look at our skill set structures to enable the Commission to move towards better decision making around use of its existing mandate on accountability. What you won't see, and what we've never seen in the Commission's budget, is budgeted as part of its core budget in the footprint the costs of legal proceedings or the costs of running an inquiry. And that's been a deliberate decision, given that it's really difficult to predict. And it would be quite counterintuitive to say that we think we're going to be sufficiently concerned about an issue in next year that we'll want to run an inquiry or that we'll want to take something to court. It wouldn't be right for us to budget and to target on that basis, to say that we want to be in court twice a year and we know it's going to cost it. It's not going to work that way. So what we do have through the CRC process negotiations, and this is something that the committee inquiry we hope will consider, because it will be applicable across multiple office holders, is that Parliament will need to consider how to resource that. So should the Commission now get to that tipping point through the evidence that's coming through its spotlight monitoring, that actually we think there's grounds for an inquiry here, or we would like to progress with strategic litigation or own name litigation, we will need to come to Parliament with a contingency bid on that basis. And that's a new way of working, I think, relationally with the budgeting process of the Commission and SPCB. And it's something, I think, for the new committee inquiry to consider. But we don't build our core budget on that basis. So in theory, you could say that we're not resourced to deliver it, but it's deliberately so. But it's something that we will need to get to grips with across SPCB, the office holder landscape, and the evidence base, because it's as yet untested.
Thanks, that information is really helpful there. That's me, Convener. Thanks.
Thank you. We'll now move on to questions from Paul O'Kane, please.
Thanks, Convener. And good morning to Jan and to Angela. I think just in terms of trying to follow up on that Commissioner piece that we were just discussing, I suppose this committee will seek to influence colleagues and help to shape some of what is looked at, I think, within that. And I think that's important. I think given the opportunity to the various stakeholders to be able to do that. I mean, my sense from the discussion there is that we would want to see perhaps a broader look beyond just perhaps the mechanics, if you like, of commissioners and very often the financial implication. And I think Angela's points around root and branch are important. I think what we've heard in this committee, because we have the duty to consider commissioners' proposals that often come before us, is that access to justice is what's missing, and I think we've touched on that already. I just want to get a sense of, I mean, looking at your access to justice for everyone piece of work. I mean, is that something you would want to see form the basis of conversations and recommendations within that wider piece of work? And is there anything specific in that you would want to highlight and put on the record at this stage?
Again, going back to the evidence base of the Commission in the 2023 Crossroads paper, absolutely. Our assessment at that time was the driving force behind much of those calls is exactly as you've outlined, access to justice. There are advocacy elements which are separate, but what the Commission wants to focus on is how can this body, this organisation be developed so that it has those powers and potentially resources to better deliver access to justice for everyone. So that, for example, through this Commission, would look as a minimum at removing the restrictions on the Commission to provide advice to individuals. We're prevented from doing that through our current legislation. That doesn't mean to say we could provide advice to everybody in Scotland on their human rights, but it would be helpful for us to have that restriction removed where we do believe that an individual's approached us with an issue that is sufficiently egregious and could be therefore tested through the courts. We would like the power to raise own name litigation in respect of human rights cases. That builds on the incorporation project that was now started through the CRC Act, so we need to keep an eye on that as it progresses, but that would be really useful for everyone. We want to have potential powers of investigation, so to give the likes of our spotlight work a more statutory footing, and as part of the development of that work to be able to compel evidence and information from duty bearers and public bodies. We cannot do that currently. We can ask, we can go on the basis of what information is available to us publicly, but more often than not it would be really helpful to be able to compel the information that we need, and we currently cannot do that. So those amendments to our legislation would enable the development or the evolution of a Human Rights Commission that can deliver greater access to justice for everyone, and that includes all of those groups who have called for new public bodies. There is potentially more the Commission could do in respect of representation and membership of the Commission. So currently our legislation restricts membership of the Commission to 4 members, part-time members plus a chair. That's quite a small number of individuals to enable the Commission to have a really rounded perspective and enable the principles of pluralism which are enshrined in the Paris Principles, which guide the development and the structure of national human rights institutions, and that's set by international bodies such as the UN. We've got no power to change that currently, so we would appreciate that. And that may give us the opportunity, depending on how the Commission would wish to deploy those powers and how Parliament would wish to consider the recruitment, to bring in more diversity of experience and ensure that there is visibility of different groups and different experiences informing the work of the Commission. So that those principles of access to justice, visibility, representation absolutely could be a greater focus perhaps of the existing committee inquiry, with a view to informing the development and evolution of a Human Rights Commission that can do more for more. The final part of that would be our monitoring work. So as Angela and I have outlined, our resources are small, so with a team of 15, some of those 15 work in non-expert roles, so the number of people who are actually out there doing the monitoring on the field is even smaller. So our legal and policy team is 8 folk, and we're the Commission to do more regular monitoring of specific human rights treaties such as CRPD around disabled people, CEDAW around elimination of violence against women, STAIRD, racial discrimination. We could do that, we would just need to build a stronger and larger monitoring team that ideally would be able to get out of Edinburgh more into communities and provide stronger evidence. So we could absolutely do that. That wouldn't require legislative change. We can do that already. That would just require the resources to enable it. So there's 2 different routes, I think, through this: legislative change and more powers, and then strengthening the monitoring role of the Commission. But arguably, an increased monitoring capacity without those enhanced powers to then shift the dial and move things forward is not necessarily what we would advocate for.
I think that's helpful in terms of just committee thinking about how we engage with that as well. So I'm very grateful, Convener.
Thank you. Now move on to questions from Pam Gossel, please.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Jan and Angela, and thank you for your opening statements and all the information you've provided so far. Just moving on from my colleague Paul's questions, the State of the Nation report provides an assessment of how civil and political rights are met in Scotland. In fact, the Commission found that human rights failings occur across Scotland, specifically in places of detention and across rural communities. Extensive barriers were also found reported in justice, which you have mentioned there, and you've talked about the monitoring. So I wanted to ask, how has that report been received, and what kind of feeling do you get that the Scottish Government and public authorities are going to address these failings? I know you've mentioned on the monitoring side, but more the fact, do you think they'll address these failings?
Thank you. Well, I mean, I hope in the first instance that you all find the State of the Nation a useful report and a helpful summary of some of the more pressing areas of rights failures in relation to civil and political rights. It's the first time that the Commission has produced a report of this kind in this framing of State of the Nation. And the civil and political rights focus follows on from our access to justice focus, the evidence from our places of excuse me, places of detention review, recommend repeat report. And we saw, I think, for the first time in a while, an increase in reference to the Commission's evidence and position in the parliamentary debate on the 10th of December on International Human Rights Day. And that's certainly something that we would, and we've been in, we would encourage this committee to think about, is framing an annual Human Rights Day debate around the state of the nation on particular rights. And so our State of the Nation report this December will be on economic, social and cultural rights, given that yesterday we submitted our evidence to the International Convention on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights Committee, and we'll be giving evidence in Geneva in February. And so our spotlight work will be continuing throughout the year and across the country on economic, social and cultural rights. In terms of, and so we're hoping that, and we have engaged with the First Minister and a number of Cabinet Secretaries on the findings as presented in the State of the Nation and on places of detention, and we'll be engaging on deinstitutionalisation and coming home. The recommendations are very clear, and the recommendations, as Jan has said a number of times, set out what the responses require to be. And so that also provides a basis for scrutiny by parliamentary committees in terms of what actions are being taken by the Scottish Government and by duty bearers. And that role of Parliament and parliamentary committees flows from what we hope to have further conversations with this committee and others about in relation to what are called the Belgrade principles of how parliaments should engage with the national human rights institutions and with their recommendations. And the principles require parliaments to engage with what recommendations have been made by national human rights institutions and what action government and parliament are taking to respond to those recommendations. So we think, fulfilling our duty in enabling greater accountability and scrutiny from Parliament and by providing you with this information through whether it's State of the Nation or the Spotlight reports. I don't know if there's anything else to want to add there.
Thank you very much for the question and for raising the State of the Nation with us. It was the first time that the Commission has produced this, and it was one of the first commitments from the new strategic plan as part of that shift to accountability to provide an annual report to Parliament on the state of a particular group of human rights, and this time the focus was civil and political. We would be the feedback that we've had and the reception for that so far from MSPs has been positive, as indicated by consideration in the Chamber, but we would really be interested in exploring with the committee and with the presiding officer how we can fulfil our duty as an NHRI, as the Human Rights Commission, as part of this parliamentary system, to make that a part of regular business, because what it does give is some direction and a framework for that annual debate that goes beyond thematic priorities and the theory of human rights into what's really happening in people's lives, and it gives the opportunity transparently for a response from Scottish Government on an annual basis. So we'd be really grateful to consider how to continue those conversations. There's other work ongoing as a result of or as part of the programme of work that Scottish Government have now committed to instead of a human rights bill, including work on a human rights tracking tool, and the Commission Commission continues to be engaged in those conversations to consider on a longer term basis the evidence base that will then inform the continued development of the State of the Nation model. So it was our first time, we'll continue to evolve it. We would really appreciate your feedback as a committee and all of you as committee members, because you're the audience, it's for you. So yeah, but we would be really grateful to explore how that can now become part of a shared platform of work.
No, thank you. Angela, you said you spoke to the First Minister. You may want to divulge what was said, but was it received, your recommendations and your considerations well? And it's good that you've said to have a debate on this as well, focused on it, but was it received well? Can you say?
Well, we met with the First Minister ahead of the publication of both Highlands and Islands and State of the Nation, and that was very much part of me new in role as the new chair and a new First Minister, and resetting relationships really with at that political level, recognising that it had been some time since the head of government had met with the head of the National Human Rights Institution. We have written to the First Minister, as I mentioned in my opening statement, following up from that meeting, and we copied that letter to yourselves, setting out much of the content of this morning's conversation, really, in relation to actions in the non-legislative space, where there's again so many recommendations coming forward that through the time remaining in this current parliamentary session, we could see action from committees and from government across the range of rights that we have been spotlighting. We were well received. We have reset that relationship and look forward to biannual meetings with the First Minister and more regular meetings with the Minister for Equalities and the relevant CAB secretaries. In the interim period, or since coming into my role, I've met with the CAB sec for Justice just the other day on our places of detention report. We've met with Ms Robison through the Equality Human Rights Budget Advisory Group work that we do, and we have had 2 meetings, I think, with Ms Somerville in relation to the Human Rights Bill and ongoing work in relation to Human Rights Bill, the tracker tool and other work in what the Scottish Government are terming this pre-implementation phase. And across all of those meetings, we have been pointing out what it is possible to do in the non-legislative space in relation to whether it's our own, the discussion this morning of our own efficacy and powers, but also in relation to the many recommendations around places of detention and the other legislative deliberations around, for example, legal aid and legal aid reform. So they're the same conversations that we're having with government as we're sharing with you today.
I've got a supplementary on that, but then I've got one more question as well. So thank you for your responses there. Even to this day, women still are at a disadvantage compared to men, and this is particularly true for women in custody. 2 years ago, a male double rapist was briefly placed into a women's prison by simply claiming he was a woman. This puts so many vulnerable women at risk. Therefore, I wanted to ask the witnesses, do you recognise the importance of single-sex spaces and services, especially when it comes to vulnerable women like women in custody or in rape crisis centres?
Thank you very much for your question. I think as framed, yes, absolutely, we recognise the importance of ensuring that the rights of all individuals are upheld and are protected in whatever space, and the principles of universality and non-discrimination have to apply in any organisational context where they are setting their operational policy. And we have had conversations that predate me, certainly, with the Scottish Prison Service and others in ensuring that their policies are compliant with the Council of Europe guidance and other guidance. And so ensuring that anyone in a vulnerable situation, that their rights are upheld. And that's what our work across Access to Justice is highlighting and has successively spotlighted, whether it's children, people with learning disabilities, women and women prisons, and indeed the rights of transgender prisoners as well. So that there has to be an approach that is universal and non-discriminatory and doesn't roll back on the rights of all.
Did you want to say anything on that? My last question, you have to know, is about, obviously you've mentioned quite a lot of this going through your answering some of the questions, is what more can us MSPs do to ensure that Parliament is effective on on human rights guarantor? I know that you mentioned earlier on the debate and some of the monitoring stuff that you want to do. And is there any benefit in further work with members and committees that you want to do? And what planning should there be in place to prepare for the next parliamentary session?
Well, thank you very much for that question. We could do a whole full session on that. We've got a big long list, really, so I'll try and cut through that. I think the leadership of this committee and leadership of members of Parliament individually and collectively is essential. That human rights are not an add-on. Human rights have to be a frame of mind in how legislation is made, how public bodies as duty bearers are scrutinised, and that human rights are not marginal to the shared ambition of this Parliament, which is about the conditions and well-being of how people live in this country, and that taking a human rights-based approach should enable parliamentarians to avoid those trade-offs. And thinking about winners and losers, because there should be no losers in a human rights-based approach, which puts front and centre what are the rights as basic rights to dignity, autonomy and respect for individuals, and how can those fundamentals be achieved through the legislative process. And I think that requires some practical activity in terms of building the knowledge base of parliamentarians, researchers and staff, building that confidence and comfort in using not just the language but conceptually applying human rights in everyday, thinking about everyday settings, and that means also being better equipped for more effective legislative scrutiny and more effective scrutiny and engagement with the budget at all stages. But there's an opportunity, as I say, for Parliament to lead the conversation on human rights in public, the public conversation. And I think that's also comes from being prepared to be more challenging of one another in the parliamentary space, to ask for human rights analysis, human rights assessment of legislative and budgetary proposals, but also challenging one another in terms of the extent to which human rights have been considered. And that also means engaging with a wider range of rights holders and perspectives and experiences in committee and committee sessions. I think we would welcome an opportunity to discuss directly with the committee and other committees, really, the actions that you may consider for any legacy reports. And I think a number of the points we've made today point to what could be the business and priorities of the next parliamentary session. And I think we're also very willing, and we have indicated this previously, and with the clerking team as well, we're very willing, very happy to discuss and support some of that knowledge building, capacity building with this committee and with future committees. And I think particularly maybe a refreshed look at what the Belgrade Principles mean and the extent to which Parliament is currently carrying out its function as intended by those international principles, and where there's room for development in the next parliamentary session. But between then and now, you've got a lot of legislation in front of you, and so to encourage that always to be scrutinised from a human rights perspective. Can
I just quickly ask one more question? Since you talked about rights there, and earlier on you picked up on this, that you mentioned that the rights for women and the rights for people with a disability and the rights of people from ethnic minorities or BAME communities. We've heard in this committee evidence that sometimes it's quite challenging engaging and reaching out to certain communities, especially ethnic minority communities. I wanted to ask if you had any problems, because you did speak about that you've did some work there, and what sort of gaps did you feel that, or what can we do more even, or you do more to help reach out to those communities? Because we certainly know, I know coming from a BAME background, that there are certain things that, not just as a woman, that I would find difficult, right, whether it's a job or anything else, but also as an ethnic minority, living in a different culture, that I would find difficult doing certain things that we would probably take granted as women every day we would go out and do, because of the cultural aspect and the surroundings. So just a little bit on that, if you can shed some light.
Well, again, there's matter there for another whole session, but certainly, our participation strategy is a way of kind of formalising what we want to see as our approach. As I said at the very beginning, that recognise the human standing beside you, and that that means recognising difference of experience, not making assumptions about people's knowledge bases, people's experiences, that there is the same level of information and engagement. I think it's about making sure that we collectively speak to the public in a way that makes people feel valued and that they matter, and that their opinion and experiences matter, and they're not just instrumental, they're not extractive bits of evidence. They're actually about trying to make a difference in people's lives. There are various procedural elements that support this process in terms of ensuring that there is a diversity and a range of evidence and individuals coming before not just this committee but across Parliament. How accessible is Parliament? How well resourced is, and we know it's not terribly well resourced, the education and participation support from Parliament. And I think, as I said a moment ago, that collective vision and collective conversation about why human rights matter, and that human rights are about everyone's rights. And it's okay to talk about rights, because we have, I think, I've certainly grown up in a culture where rights were seen as bold and being an upstart, and being some kind of importation of other ideals. But rights are about our everyday. It's about the conditions in which we would want to live, and we would want our loved ones and our families and our neighbours to live without discrimination, without a lack of dignity, and with real autonomy in their lives. Who doesn't want that? And so that's the conversation I think we need to have, and that from that mindset, your own procedures and processes flow in terms of who's being talked to, in what way, what information is provided, how accessible is this environment, how often does the committee or any committees leave this environment and go to where people are, how much does the Parliament expect people to come here, and what a challenge that is for many, many people. And I say that as well as just having tried to organise separately from my role at the Commission, but a visit to the Parliament of a group of disabled women, part of the Women's Economic Empowerment Project with Scottish Women's Budget Group and Glasgow Disability Alliance. And that was really quite a challenging endeavour, to bring a small group of disabled women to the Parliament. So we have a lot of collective ambition, but collective action to take in that area.
John, did you want to add anything?
On the more specific point around the Commission's approach to engaging with communities, as you've described. So just to reflect, in this past year, the Commission did engage in the international monitoring cycle around the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. The first time the Commission had engaged in that treaty monitoring cycle, as far as we're aware, certainly in the recent past. That presented us with challenges in ensuring that we were informed by people's experiences in line with our strategy. And so this year our approach was to work in partnership with civil society networks as best as we could, to work through their approaches, their networks, and get directly to people and hear from people in that way. And we're keeping, we learn as we go. It was the first time that we did that. I think we realised as a commission that we weren't particularly set up or did not have connections and profile necessarily with those communities. For that reason, it was the first time we'd had done it. So I just wanted to reflect that we're aware of that. We know that that's a gap, and we're working through that. And my final reflection, possibly in respect of the Commission, is around representation, and that's perhaps something that the committee could be feeding through into the SPCB network when it comes to recruitment of members of the Commission, to ensure that that's front and centre of consideration within the current size and scale of the Commission, or to the future where we might look to have broader representation through a greater number of commissioners.
Thank you. Thank you, Convener.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from Tess White, please.
Thank you. I've got a question and a follow-up, if I may, Convener. So my question, please, is the committee will be considering the Scottish budget in February, but do you have any comment to make on the Scottish Government's approach to human rights budgeting and indeed the scrutiny of the budget by parliamentary committees?
Indeed we do. Indeed we do. And you mentioned Ali Hosey earlier on in her evidence. Ali is our research officer and has been one of the leads on this piece of work, as well as myself in my capacity as convener of the Scottish Government's the independent convener of the Equality Human Rights Budget Advisory Group prior to taking up this role. So it's been an area of focus for us for a number of years at the Commission. We think that taking a human rights-based approach to resource allocation, revenue raising, is that golden thread, really, in terms of joining the dots between what are the policy and political ambitions and how are they being resourced. And are they being resourced in a way that respects the human rights, protects it and fulfils it by making resource available to ensure that those ambitions and those obligations are being met. So when it comes to scrutinising the draft budget and at the pre-budget stage as well over the summer, that committees and individual parliamentarians are engaged in looking to see, well, from what has the budget been formulated from a perspective that is concerned with rights realisation and the guarantee of access to rights? Are resources being raised in such a way that they are compatible with human rights? And that means maximising available resources for the progressive realisation of rights, which you're nodding away there. So that's a phrase you've heard before. I used to say I wanted it on a T-shirt and I would just wear it all the time, because it's about raising resources for a purpose, and that purpose is this shared vision of Parliament in terms of the conditions in which people live their lives. And so what we've done now in 2 cycles is engage with the Scottish Government on the Open Budget Survey, and what we've seen is certainly some progress around some of the procedural and documentary elements of the budget process, but there's still a way to go in terms of transparency, and particularly transparency around changes on in-year spend. And so there's the scrutiny of the draft budget as it comes through Parliament, and then there's and again I say this as a former member of the budget review process that introduced the pre-budget scrutiny step in the budget process, and the intention there was for Parliament to look back and forward. So what commitments have been agreed to in the life cycle of the Parliament? How are those outcomes Are those outcomes being realised? And from our perspective, are they being realised in a way that protects, respects and fulfils those rights? Or does there need to be either a readjustment of the pot or a readjustment of the policy objectives and intentions from a human rights perspective to then inform the next cycle of the budget round? So there's a number of ways in which Parliament can be engaged in that, and I think that's also about the questions and the scrutiny back to government and how the process of budget formulation has been arrived at, and the extent to which and the quality of the analysis that goes on within directorates, and what is the level of comfort at individual directorates in terms of how satisfied are senior managers within directorates and how satisfied are ministers and cabinet secretaries with the human rights analysis that they see coming forward that has informed particular budget decisions. So there's certainly, we think, a role for greater scrutiny from Parliament there.
I suppose the reason I'm nodding my head is for 3 decades, my role before I became an MSP was to actually look at the spend and is it delivering the outcomes. But it seems as we go, and we've got, and I'll quote Dr. Hosey again, because it seems as though we go into this budgeting round, there's this intersectional disconnect. And she said, from her evidence session to us, she said that the Scottish Government's approach to massive in-year spending cuts was not a very satisfactory process, and it was not transparent. So when our committee were looking at things like, you know, the huge percentage of women, 90% with learning needs who have been sexually assaulted, inoculation centres being centralised in rural areas, and we're not surprised that there's a huge issue with flu in our hospitals because people can't get their jabs. We're looking at, you know, we've mentioned the GP contract. Maternity services, you've mentioned, Professor O'Hagan, about, you know, women giving birth by the side of the road. And two more examples, the increasing number of hypothermia of over 50s actually presenting themselves in hospitals. And finally, FGM. FGM, there hasn't been a single conviction. So I suppose my question to you is, and I appreciate you new in the role, and it's been a very helpful session today, thank you, is what's your view that we as a committee can do more of, and the Scottish Government to actually start to apply a human rights perspective and overlay on the budgeting process when it's not happening right now?
I completely agree with Dr. Hosey, with Ali's comments, and there's more of them. We published yesterday the third in a series of blogs from Ali and from the Commission, looking at what we think are deficiencies in the allocations and in the process that informed those allocations. So poor use of evidence, decision making not drawing on the starting point really needs to be what's currently happening, what is the need, what interventions are necessary, and therefore what resources, rather than starting sometimes the other way around with either what resources are available or how do we cut resources. And the Audit Scotland has been very clear on this for a number of years, that it is imperative that those areas where spending is being reduced or withdrawn, that the implications of that are properly identified in terms of how will individuals be affected, and what will the other cost effects of that be on other areas of services and public resources. And I think what Ali was maybe referring to the last time were the emergency budget cuts, where I think our position at the Commission was we felt there had really been very limited human rights and equalities analysis of those cuts that resulted in, for example, the withdrawal of the pilot on asylum seeker transport. So we are engaged in the Scottish Government with the Scottish Government on that point to try and better understand why that policy was announced and then immediately reversed, and what's the thought process that goes into this. And I know there are officials who have been for a long time working very hard on this, but I think there needs to be greater scrutiny by committees, greater demand from committee scrutiny on what has been the decision-making process, what has been the analytical process that has led to decisions and led to decisions that ministers come to Parliament with, because there needs to be an improvement on the process side in terms of what kind of time are officials given to do robust analysis, what data is available to them and how is it used in terms of ensuring robust analysis. What evidence are they using about just as you're quite rightly asking us, what our evidence is for our outcomes and how we measure our success, how we inform our priorities. Those same questions need to consistently be asked around the processes of resource generation and resource allocation in relation to budgetary decisions, and how effective those decisions are in supporting the intended outcomes, and then are those outcomes being achieved, and if not, why not? Is it a question of insufficiency of resource, inappropriate or just unsuccessful policy efforts? What's the analysis of implementation of policy, and how is it evaluated? Are policy objectives evaluated in terms of the extent to which they are securing the realisation of rights? And if not, is that about the policy design or about an insufficiency of resources, which again takes us back to there is an obligation on all states parties to ensure resources are maximised in such a way that they secure the progressive realisation of rights.
Do you think it's too late now? We're very late into the process. You met with Shona Robison. Are we going to see a human rights overlay on the budgeting process?
I think at this stage that there has to be the demand from committees and from Parliament. We've made our position clear, and we've been working to improve the process and support the improvement of the process through EBAG for a number of times. If it doesn't happen now, it's going to be a significant disappointment. In 20 years of trying to support this process, I'm getting quite used to disappointments in the budgetary space. But there's opportunity, and we can't never say never. And I think it's been a long process of education and awareness raising, and for people just quite simply to get their head around the relationship between human rights and public finance. And we see it as a very, very obvious and very immediate relationship. And so if it doesn't happen this time round, there's opportunity to challenge. There's one more budget remaining at the moment in this parliamentary cycle. But there's also a body of evidence to tell Parliament how to get it, how to do it better and how to get it right in future. Whether that comes from the open budget survey work that we've done, as well as all the human rights budgeting analysis and guidance that we have produced over the years.
So the jury's out. And it's not happening, but you've got hope.
Well, we have to have hope, don't
Thank
we?
you. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you. We've had a really full and very detailed session. It's been extremely informative. I'm really grateful for that. I just want to finish on one last question from myself. It's just we've spoke a lot about resources and really on that topic, just asking, you know, quite straight out here, do you have enough resource and staffing to be able to fulfil the duties that you have at the moment, particularly in light of having the new powers in regards to UNCRC?
I'm thinking, do we have enough? How much is ever enough? We are doing what we can with the resource that we have, and we have indicated where we need more. We need different powers and different resource to be able to use those powers more effectively. And I mean, I think we're very aware of the climate at the moment, not just in terms of public finance, but also with the committee inquiry, and where Parliament and certainly the inquiry committee are focused on how public resources are currently being used. I think for 28 pence per head of population, we are extremely good value at the Scottish Human Rights Commission, but whether that's enough and whether that's what Parliament thinks is enough to see rights realised in Scotland is also a question for yourselves. But Jan, I'm sure, has some more detail on that.
Yeah, I mean, so the priority obviously within the Commission just now is to make the best use of the resource that we've got and maximise the impact of this small budget, which in the year of the annual report was £1.3 million. With those adjustments that we've described, that takes us up to slightly more. There's always going to be more that the Commission could do within its existing mandate, whether that is more education and awareness raising. We're really mindful at the minute that that's an impact of our priority on accountability, is that we don't have the capacity to go out and deliver a proactive education programme on human rights. How could we be better ensuring that those who are making decisions around budget and signing those things off, how can we be satisfied that those individuals are applying and taking and are skilled to enable a human rights-based approach to those budgetary decisions? That's a programme of work that would require planning and that would require resourcing. So there's always going to be a lot more that the Commission could deliver. Our job just now is to maximise what we currently have. We do have additional resource coming in to service the UNCRC requirements, and we'll establish over the next 2 years whether that's sufficient. And operationally, with the support of SPCB through that contingency funding, to look at structure. The outcome of that will be, okay, take the current mandate, take the current strategic plan, and we would like to do a horizon scan of what else we could do, so that we do have a costed model of what servicing the existing mandate of the Commission could look like. There will always be priorities to be made, and they must be guided by our strategic plan. So that's the process that we'll go through. And then, of course, we had gone through quite a significant exercise of looking at what the potential expansion of the Commission's mandate would require in terms of that costed model. So we do have figures associated with that. And as I've explored before, the value of the Commission getting out of Edinburgh, going up to the 20 communities in the Highlands and Islands, we're going back again in February and March. It would be wonderful to do a lot more of that, and I think communities and duty bearers and people living in those communities would really value that. That would require resourcing also. So there's never enough. There is absolutely more that we can do, and we're very live to those conversations, but it will be an evidence-based process that we go through that. We are about to be reaccredited by the UN processes around our status as an A-status human rights institution, and that gives us the latitude to report independently without fear or favour to the United Nations and Council of Europe on the status of human rights enjoyment in Scotland. And the more that we can do to have a really robust evidence base that's informed by people's lived experiences, the better. And we will always be clear with that mechanism, that additional resource would be welcome. And it may well be that would be a recommendation that comes out of the reaccreditation process. So we'll continue to keep the committee informed of that.
That's great. Thank you both very much. That concludes our formal business for today, and we will suspend and go into private session now to discuss the final items on our agenda. Thank you so much.